My name is Ben Bollinger. I'm a senior at Elmhurst University, and I'm studying computer science and religious studies. Before I came to Christ, I was an atheist for most of my thinking life as an adolescent, I would say. So from like middle school to high school. And it was a time of a lot of just flipping back and forth with what I believe, right? So when I first became an atheist, I was very militant in my atheism. Very annoying about it, I would say. And I just didn't really know what I believed, but I just knew I did not believe in God. And yeah, after that, I kind of stopped caring a lot about religion. I cared more about politics, so I got really invested in different political systems, like almost emotionally invested, I would say, to the point where that kind of was what my entire life revolved around, was just keeping up with like the latest political trends. And, you know, I pretty much lived my entire life online, right? I didn't have many real life friends, real life interactions, right? My entire world was just consumed with ideology, and, you know, I had some kind of commitment to wanting to believe true things, but I didn't really have a solid reason for why I had that desire. And so it was just a very, I think, lonely and, you know, sad time of my life where I just didn't know what I wanted, right? I didn't know like what to believe. And, but I, you know, of course I was very confident in what I did believe. But yeah, I would just say I was very lost is how I would describe it in a word, I think. Yeah, so like when I kind of started my political journey, I started off very like libertarian, you know, that's how I would have identified myself. But as I started getting more into like libertarian philosophy, I obviously came across its critics. You know, there are many critics of libertarian philosophy, but you know, the most prominent ones, at least in intellectual spheres, I think were Marxists. And so it was largely just online, like mostly on Instagram was like the big political scene for me. You know, I mean, I was a kid, right? Keep in mind, I'm not like in the academy studying these things professionally. But that's how I was introduced to Marxist philosophy, was through just social media. And you know, I was pointed to different works by Marx, such as, you know, the Communist Manifesto or other lesser known works like the Grundrisse. And you know, I just became very compelled by it, you know, mostly from an economic perspective. I just thought that it made a lot of sense. I thought it could explain the way that history moved, the, you know, antagonisms between different classes of people. I just thought that it was an accurate representation of history, an accurate representation of our modern political economy. And so that really swept me in, because it seemed like it had all the answers to, you know, why this world seems so broken. And it also seemed to have the perfect solution to what we can do about this broken world. And of course, it gave me kind of the sense of intellectual superiority, like I have this secret knowledge that nobody else has, and you know, I need to share this with other people. And so, you know, there is a bit of pride that goes into that as well. So I was technically raised Christian, so I was baptized as an infant as a Lutheran. And so I grew up going to church. I went to preschool at a Lutheran church here in Illinois. And so I was exposed to, you know, Christ and the Bible early on in my life. And I was taught how to pray by my parents and stuff like this, taught to pray before meals. But as I became an atheist, I kind of came to reject all of that. But it was still in the back of my head, I feel like, you know, I still had that formation. And so after I became sort of disillusioned with atheism, with Marxism especially, I started asking questions about, you know, like, you know, why don't I just kill myself? You know, why? Obviously, I was never seriously considering that, but I was just considering it from an intellectual perspective. Like, why do I continue living? Like, what is the reason I have for continuing to live? And that, at least, I think, opened me up to other perspectives on the meaning of life. Because, you know, I kind of just had come to assume atheism as like the default worldview. Like, obviously atheism is true. I just have to figure out, you know, the other important stuff like politics, economics. I'd never actually really questioned the atheism that I came to adopt. And, but this experience kind of, you know, made me open-minded. And I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't just assume that atheism is true. You know, maybe I should give a different perspective a chance. And so that's when I got into the philosophy of theism. I was exposed to writers like Thomas Aquinas, for instance, and his philosophical proofs for the existence of God. And I particularly remember watching this one YouTube video that went through Aquinas's argument from motion. And I remember by the end of it, I had no idea what was said in that entire video. I was so confused by it. I was like, and that interests me. I'm like, wow, maybe, there is more to belief in God than just, oh, I was just raised this way. Maybe people actually do have real reasons for why they believe. And I just found that very interesting. And so I began to read more about it. I looked into especially this argument from contingency that Aquinas formulates. I found it very compelling. And yeah, that's kind of what introduced me to God, and at least to belief in God. Yeah, so through studying these philosophical arguments, I came to a belief in God, but I had not yet become a Christian, right? I just kind of had this intellectual belief that, okay, it seems that atheism does not really make sense philosophically. It seems that there has to be a God if we are to, believe that the world is real and that we can actually understand the world. It seems that God is the best explanation for that. But there were certain characteristics of this God I was learning about in just philosophical musings, such as, God is not just the God of deism, right? He's not just someone who sets the world into motion, but he's actually intimately involved in the upholding of the world at all moments, right? And he has specially designed humanity to come to know him and his creation. These were things I was coming to independently of Christian faith. And so to me, a mere intellectual belief in God just wasn't very tenable. And so it seemed that this God, even though you can't really prove this philosophically, but it seemed to lend itself to the idea that this was a God who reveals himself. This was a God who is intimately involved in the affairs of humans. And I just thought to myself, what kind of God is this? And that's when I was really reintroduced to the Bible for the first time, I think. And I learned that there is a God who claims to be like this, and he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I particularly remember I watched this video about the sacrifice of Isaac in the Old Testament. And I saw all these parallels between the sacrifice of Isaac and the sacrifice of Christ. It's an only son who carries his own sacrificial wood up a mountain in Jerusalem. And Isaac is not a young boy, he's probably in his 30s, he's a young man. He could have stopped his father from sacrificing him if he wanted to, but he didn't. He submitted to his father's will and he offers himself on Mount Moriah. And when I saw those parallels, and that's just scratching the surface, there's so many more than that, I just came to realize that there's something different about the Bible. There's something divine about it, something miraculous about it. And that's really when I came to believe in Christ, that he is the central figure of not just this book, but he is the central figure of history. And I became very compelled of that if these claims are true, which I think they are, then I have to be a Christian. And that's when I decided to follow Christ. It took me a while for the implications of that to really set in, because it's one thing to intellectually believe something and be like, okay, yes, I believe that God is real. I genuinely believe he's real. I genuinely believe that, the Bible is true and that all these things, they actually happened, that, Jesus is real, he is who he says he is. But, he doesn't just make claims about himself, he also makes claims about how we're supposed to live. And there were many things in my life that were not in line with the way that he has called us to live. And so I had to confront that I have to root certain sins out of my life. I have to actually, make an effort to be, kind to others, to be loving to others, that this is not just optional. Prior to becoming a Christian, I would consider myself a very cynical person. Yeah, I would say I was like a very, just utilitarian. I would only be moral if it was beneficial to me in that situation, right? So, take the instance of lying. It's very easy to lie when there's really no consequence for it. And that's something I was just so accustomed to doing, whether that's lying to my parents, lying to teachers, lying to my friends, just because telling the truth would just be inconvenient, and that was something I had to stop doing. I had a reason other than just my own benefit to do the right thing in these different circumstances. And so that was something that I had to change in my life. And especially another thing that really changed when I became a Christian was, I had to start going to a church. And so, like I mentioned before, I was a very online person. I didn't have many social interactions in real life. And so I really had to come out of my comfort zone and start, interacting with other Christians in real life, which was very uncomfortable for me, especially growing up, because, being an atheist for so long, I really didn't like Christians, and so like now I had to put up with them and like, interact with them in real life. And so I had to like join a community and be an active participant in it. And I actually had to enter into relationships where, I had to love other people. And that really has, I think, given me much more of a desire to love others and see, to really, I like how Aquinas defines love as, willing the good of the other person, to really just will what is good for everybody. It's not easy, especially when people, are rude to you, especially because of over matters of the faith. But it has given me, much more of a drive to live the way that Christ calls us to, because it's not just because, we're supposed to follow certain rules, which we are, but it's much more than that, because, Christ shows us, what it means to truly be a human being, because, Christ is the perfect human being. He is the perfect example of what a human being is supposed to be. And that's what we're designed for, right? Sin is not normal. And I think that was a big realization when I became a Christian, was that, sin is not just, oh, that's just who I am. I just do this, I just do that. I can't change. It's just part of me. Our nature is corrupted, but we're called to so much more than that, right? We're called to perfection. We're called to live. We're called to live the way that Christ calls us to. Just that picture of humanity was so much more beautiful than anything I got in atheism. And so I think a pastor of mine, described this worldview shift very well. He said, whereas nihilism could take, even the most meaningful things in life, like the birth of a child, marriage, whatever, and see absolute nothing in that, no ultimate meaning in that. Christianity is the exact opposite. It takes even the most meaningless things in life, like, I woke up this morning, and sees absolute meaning from top to bottom in that. God has woken me up this morning. I can do nothing apart from him. I can't even stand up without him. And so that was just such a radical shift in my worldview, that it really does change the way you live if you actually believe these things. If God really is the king of the universe, if everything really is upheld by the word of his the power of his word, we would want to live differently, right? Like, we would want to live in a way that reflects that as being true. We would want the world to reflect that truth. And, not just because it's true, but also because it's beautiful, it's good, it's right. And so, I would say that that's drastically changed the way that I think about life, the way that I live my life. And